not here to sell my book, don't worry. But if you feel urged, I won't stop you either, so don't resist that temptation. What a treat to be back in Jackson, in the Capitol, with so many friends, and with two great pals that I brought with me from D.C., who have a fantastic book, which you should buy. I will emphatically say that, no reservation on that whatsoever, 2024. The eponymous book about last year's campaign, written by these two gentlemen to my right, Josh Dawsey and Tyler Pager. I'll introduce Josh first. Josh, a proud South Carolina Gamecock, wrote for the Washington Post, where he and Tyler became friends and colleagues, covering politics and President Trump and this turbulent time that we're all living through. And is now writing for the Wall Street Journal, covering the intersection of politics, influence, money, all of those great cardinal sins. Tyler Pager, son of Westchester, New York, graduate of Northwestern, and is a Wildcat. I think they're still in the Big Ten, aren't they? Are they still competitive in Big Ten?
They're getting beat up by Oregon right now.
Kind of honorary Big Ten members, kind of like the Vanderbilt of the Big Ten, right, Paul Hurst? Too soon. Tyler, after covering the Biden administration, left the Post himself as well, and is now covering the Trump White House for the New York Times. So we've got two of the best political reporters in the business who I can say unreservedly wrote a superb book about last year's campaign. Folks, I'm telling you, you got to buy this book. It is an incredible account of both the Biden White House, the Biden campaign, the late switch to Kamala Harris, as well as the Trump campaign, the Trump comeback, and goes a long way to explaining why the campaign ended the way it did and why we are where we are today in September of 2025. In fact, I think guys, tell me if I'm wrong, I think this is the only campaign book that President Trump actually cooperated for and sat down for an interview. Is that right? Yeah. So let's start, Josh, with you, with President Trump, who you've covered for some time now. A, why do you think he cooperated for the book? And B, is this a different Trump than the Trump that you first covered when he ran in 2016, ran for re-election in 2020? Or are we talking about the same guy?
Well, it's great to be with all of you here. I think he cooperated for the book because he likes to talk about what he's done.
This is Donald Trump we're talking about?
He
Checks
won.
out.
I've known him for almost a decade now. I've interviewed him about a dozen times. He wasn't going to cooperate for the book, and then near the end, we sort of went to his team with all the reporting we had for the book and what we were going to say, and then he wanted to cooperate. Sorry. The microphone's a little issue. But is there a different Trump? I don't know that it's a different Trump. I think what we saw on the campaign trail, in a lot of ways, no one would call him the most disciplined candidate in the world.
No.
But I think he was more disciplined than in the past of sticking to a message about the economy and immigration. Places you saw his campaign was spending money where he had double-digit leads over Kamala Harris on sort of those issue sets and Biden on those issue sets. And I think the biggest difference I've noticed covering this White House and the previous one is I think he has a lot of better sense, whether you like his policies or dislike his policies, of what he wants to do, what the agencies do, who he wants in place. I think in his first administration, he had a lot of sort of an island of misfit toys in his cabinet. A lot of them actually disagreed with what he wanted to do and tried to stop him from doing things. This time is not the case. He is a cabinet full of people who support him 100%. He has sort of remade, he's done things like just aesthetically in the White House. Like he's turned it sort of into a gold, I don't know if you guys have seen it on television, but it's pretty striking.
We've noticed, yeah.
In ways that he would have never done in the first term. So I think if you, and some of the things he's done on immigration, some of the things he's done at the Department of Justice, he's gone way further than he would have gone in the first term. Yeah. I think there were third rails that he didn't want to touch. There were things his lawyers told him were illegal. This time he's sort of testing as far as he can go. So I think if you like his policies, you probably see a lot to like this time. I think he's getting more done. And if you hate him, you probably see a lot more to hate
Yeah,
this
it's-
time because it's a much more effective operation of doing what he wants to do.
It feels unbound. It feels like this is the sort of Trump 2 is sort of like, on one hand, somebody who is testing every limit of American democracy and our Constitution and certainly the norms of our country and is being challenged in courts because of that. But at the same time, it also feels like Trump having fun. Like, this feels like Trump doing the stuff he always wanted to do. I want to build a ballroom in the White House. I want to put a lounge a la Mar-a-Lago on the Rose Garden. I want to take over the Kennedy Center Awards and do my own awards so I can go to that party. And then, by the way, I kind of want to go to fun stuff like the U.S. Open, too. It kind of feels like Trump just like doing whatever Trump always wanted to do, too.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I also think in the first presidency, he left a lot. He was not at the White House a lot. He did not leave this summer. I think he has a White House now because he's built it the way that he wants it, with the people the way he wants it around him, that he's a much more comfortable president than he was on the first term.
Let's turn back the clock to 23 and 24, Tyler, and talk about the remarkable end, and I don't think we've seen the last book written about the final days, to borrow the title of a different book on a different president. I don't think we've seen the last account written about the final days of Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. But what a remarkable ending to his career. Talk to us, take us inside the Biden White House, and tell us about his actual views of Kamala Harris, what the relationship was actually like, and also tell us about the role of Barack Obama with Joe Biden as well, and what the nature of that friendship of convenience was all about.
Yeah, we'll be learning a lot more about all of those things in the coming months. Kamala Harris has her book coming out later.
But why
this
wait?
month.
They can buy yours first.
Yeah, exactly. And be a lot more reporting in our book.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's just a remarkable story of Joe Biden. I think all of those relationships, to understand them, you sort of have to understand the psychology of Joe Biden. This is somebody who his entire life wanted to be president. When he was like 18 years old and met the parents of his first wife, who tragically died in that famous car accident, they asked him what he wanted to be, and he said president. And they said, of what? And he had to clarify the United States. So I think it's just important to sort of understand that this is a life journey for Joe Biden. He long had a chip on his shoulder. He was the poorest member of the Senate, which he will eagerly remind you of. He did not go to an Ivy League institution. And so that really formed this sort of worldview that he had, that he was up against the world. I mean, he was also a senator from the age of 29 through his late 60s. So I think that's an important context, too. But I think this is, to understand his decision not to run again, to not drop out, you really have to take a look back. And particularly as you look at the relationship with Barack Obama, I think J. Martin had it right, really what started as a marriage of convenience grew into a real friendship, but there was always tension there. Biden and his aides always felt that Obama looked down on him, part of that chip on his shoulder. He wasn't that smart, he said stupid things, and he just sort of thought he could, brute force his way through politics, through relationships and handshakes and kissing babies. And Obama didn't do that. That was not what he was good at. So they had very different political styles. And then, Obama never thought highly of Joe Biden's political skills. So Obama did not want Joe Biden to run for president in 2016. He made that pretty clear. And Biden long felt frustrated and burdened or burned by Obama for pushing him not to run. When Hillary lost, Biden and his aides thought he could win. And so throughout the course of Joe Biden's political career, particularly the end of it, there was always this Obama or Obama aides voices in his head, saying, you can't win, you can't do that, you're not good enough to do it. And that really formed this sort of resistance to Obama and his team. Obama did not think Joe Biden should run in 2016. He did not think he should run in 2020. Biden wins. Obama still doesn't think he should run again in 2024. So like the story of Joe Biden's career is sort of trying to best Obama. And I think we saw that throughout the administration. You'd often hear Biden talk about Obama we did it bigger than the Obama administration did. We did it better. And the Biden people thought Obama was a prick. When Obama came back to the White House for the first time, this is something that, I don't think a lot of people caught on, but Obama came back for the anniversary of the Affordable Care Act to do this event, and he introduces Joe Biden as Vice President Biden. And he jokes and said, I'm just kidding, I used to do it all the time. But the Biden people were apoplectic. They thought it was disrespectful and rude. So a lot of drama there, and I think it's important to understand that because a lot of people were like, where is Obama? Why isn't Obama telling him not to run? Why isn't Obama telling him to drop out? Obama didn't have the credibility to deliver that message because Biden just didn't trust him.
Yeah, it was always the irony of the sort of the conservative narrative was always that Obama was secretly pulling the strings of the Biden White House, and Eric Holder was somewhere in the background too, and that was always laughable to everybody who actually covered the Biden White House because it was the opposite. They so resented any implication that Obama was secretly in charge, and they certainly had a very icy relationship.
Totally, and the funny thing is, all of Biden's aides worked for Obama. There's a lot of overlap there in the sort of people, the cabinet and the senior advisors. There's a core Biden team that was loyal first to Biden, but there was a lot of overlap between Biden and Obama. But Obama also, throughout 2023 and 2024, made it clear privately that he thought Biden's campaign was a mess.
All right, so yes.
There's a scene, just quickly.
Tough but fair.
There's a scene in the book where Obama comes to the White House to have a lunch with Biden and is warning him about the campaign. The campaign is based in Wilmington, but all the senior advisors are in Washington. And he says, you can't bifurcate the campaign structure. You need to have senior decision makers in Wilmington. It precipitates a move after that. Two of the top people move to Wilmington and really take a hands-on approach. But Obama walks out of the meeting with Biden and goes to see Biden's staff, and he just delivers the message. He says, your campaign is a mess.
So tell us about the actual relationship between Biden and Kamala Harris, and whether or not it was ever an option for him to support either an open primary or somebody else.
Yeah, so they similarly didn't know each other super well. Again, understanding Joe Biden and how he does things is through the lens of his family. He felt a connection to Kamala Harris because she was friends with his son, Beau. So Beau was the Attorney General of Delaware, Kamala was the Attorney General of California, and they had a relationship. And in the summer of 2020, George Floyd riots, a lot of protests, a lot of conversation about race. Biden promises to pick a black woman as his running mate, and there was really no other person he was considering at that point besides Kamala Harris. They didn't know each other super well. Jill Biden was not the biggest fan of Kamala Harris because she attacked him on the debate stage and sort of suggested that he was racist. So it took a long time for those bridges to be rebuilt. When Kamala Harris became vice president, there were a lot of people that did not think she was ready for the job of president, and so that was another sort of push factor for Biden to run again. His aides felt if Biden didn't run, he would have to endorse Kamala Harris. And there's an interesting moment in the book. The day that Biden drops out, he calls Kamala Harris and tells her, I'm dropping out. And that same day, Biden speaks to Jim Clyburn, who Biden owes his presidency to, for resurrecting his campaign in South Carolina in the primary. And Clyburn tells him, you have to endorse Kamala Harris. Biden was going to anyways, but they felt, Clyburn and others felt that if Biden didn't endorse Harris, it would be a slight against his own legacy. The first decision Biden made was picking Kamala as his running mate, and really the only job of a vice president is to be ready to serve. And so if Biden then 4 years later does not endorse her, it looks like he regrets the decision.
Are you surprised, just quickly, are you surprised that she apparently, in her book, which we saw excerpts from this week, is taking a knife out on Biden?
No, in the book we have from people around Kamala, she long felt that he stayed in the race too long, that the baggage of his administration, their administration, but him particularly, really hurt her candidacy.
You aren't surprised, yeah. Josh, some of the most eye-opening reporting in the book is these behind-the-scenes anecdotes that you have from Trump events, Trump fundraisers, Trump meetings at Mar-a-Lago or Bedminster in Jersey, Trump's summer White House, where he is pretty brazenly linking, money to government actions. We're kind of a nerd to this now, 10 years on. But talk to us about that for a minute and some of the promises Trump made to donors?
Yeah, well, they were pretty eye-opening promises. When Trump first came into politics, he did not like doing the fundraisers and the big dollar fundraising, and sort of said his famous catchphrase, as some of you might remember, was "drain the swamp." This time, going into the election, he signed up to do a lot of big dollar fundraisers where folks were giving $3-5 million to his PAC, lots of outside money. His allies would say, Democrats were doing it too. We're not going to disarm unilaterally, but these were pretty remarkable fundraisers. A lot of them we got audio recordings for the book and sort of got to listen to what he was saying behind the scenes to these folks. And it really was a conglomeration of, business executives, but folks who had sort of esoteric interests, right? Like nursing home folks who wanted lower regulations, or all executives who wanted things done at EPA. And they would come in and he, would basically say, what do you want done? What policies do you want done? And he would commit to them. And one of the tapes that we got, he says, these protesters on college campuses, if you give to me and we get elected, we're going to throw these people out of the country. And that was one of his promises he made to these folks. He talked a lot about folks who cared about immigration, came in and gave large amounts of money, sort of told them what he was going to do on deportations. He ended up doing them. And a lot of presidents talk pretty candidly behind the scenes with donors. That's not new really for Trump, but I think what was new was sort of folks who were coming were not, I'm a Republican donor who wants, lower taxes. It was like, I want this explicit thing for my business, for my industry, right? And in exchange, I'm going to contribute to your campaign. And a couple of times he was saying how much he hated the campaign finance laws. He says, I'm not having lunch with someone who gives $3 million. You got to give me $25 million. Like, this is peanuts for these guys, right? And sort of going on and on and on and on. And it just showed like how much he'd embraced kind of a system that he ran against in 2016 and said that he hated so much. Right. He was in these rooms in New York and Miami and Mar-a-Lago, at Bedminster, making the same kinds of transactions that he publicly decried.
My favorite one is the golf.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's one in the book where he's talking about how it was right after he had some, threats, assassination threats, and, the bullet in his ear at Butler, and then the second guy who tried to shoot him at his golf course. And he's telling these donors about how the Secret Service now is swarmed around him. They're everywhere. And he's like, they're nice guys, but I hate it because, like, I hit my ball over there, and then I want to kick it, but I look up, and there's 3 Secret Service agents, like, looking at me. He's, like, waving at me. He's like, it's the worst. I basically can't cheat at golf anymore because the Secret Service is everywhere, which was one of the more funnier moments on tape with him.
Cheating at golf and Jeffrey Epstein, 2 traditions that Bill Clinton and Donald Trump share. I had to. Josh, take us back to 2 of last year's most memorable events, maybe perhaps some of the most memorable political events of our times. One is the debacle of a debate for Joe Biden in June of last year, and then the attempt on President Trump's life in Butler, PA, the following month. Tell us about Trump's reaction himself to both of those events, starting with the debate.
Yeah, I also think one of the things we forget is how closely all of those events happened together. I mean, there was a 4-week...
There should be a book written about it,
But seriously, there was 4 weeks, in a 4-week span, there was a debate. Thank you. You're the best hype man ever. A 4-week span was between the time that Biden has a horrific debate performance, Biden drops out of the race, Trump is shot. All of that happens in less than, it's like 3.5, 4 weeks, right? I don't know that we'll ever have a period sort of as seismic in a long time in American history as that period. What was interesting about the Biden debate performance and how Trump saw it is that Trump's team had been out saying publicly, how feeble and how poor Biden was at, performing and speaking, and he was too old to run, and X, Y, Z, but they actually, and multiple of his top folks told me this, expected him to perform way better in the debate itself. Like, their talking points were sort of, well, of course he did okay. Like, he'd been practicing for 10 days at Camp David and sleeping, and of course he can stand up there for one night, because they thought he would be able to muddle through it. And we have a scene in the book where the Trump folks have taken over the volleyball arena at Georgia Tech, the debates in Atlanta, and they are sitting watching the beginning of the debate, and it's, a lot of folks who are now in his cabinet, Rubio, Vance, his top comms folks, Susie Wiles, and Biden's talking, and one of his advisors shouts out, was woman Danielle Alvarez, like, turn the TVs on, the volume's not on, and they realized the volume was on. Like, they just couldn't hear him, right? And that's how bad it was. And they ended up getting printers brought in to bring out new talking points to say he has to stay in the race, because their whole point that night watching this was they were afraid it was so bad the Democratic Party would push Biden out, and Trump wanted to do everything he could to keep him in the race. And that's sort of what the last thing they told the surrogates before they went out. They said, no matter what you're asked by the media say, he's got to stay in the race. He's got to stay in the race. And Trump comes back to his little hold room backstage and is talking to Susie Wiles, now his chief of staff, and says, like, could you believe how bad he was? Like, I honestly felt bad for the guy. That was Trump's reaction when he walked out. And he told his team, he said, I had no idea that he was going to be that bad. The second event you asked me about was the shooting in Butler, right? That was a really interesting day because most of Trump's team had already gone to Milwaukee for the convention.
Right.
And the last thing that Trump was supposed to do was announce J.D. Vance as his vice presidential nominee. He had not picked the person publicly yet, and they decided not to do it that night at Butler. There originally had been talk of announcing J.D. Vance at Butler at that rally because it was his last public event before the convention. And so when they decided not to do it, most of Trump's team just went to Milwaukee. So he was traveling with a skeleton crew. Most of them viewed the rally as sort of, not an unimportant event, but it was the last thing before the convention. And the convention was going to be, the blockbuster event for the week, right? So they have a small clutch of aides who are traveling with him. And this is one of the most interesting parts of our book to me. The day that he is shot in the ear in Butler on July 13th, Biden is actually at his beach house in Delaware meeting with all of these Democrats who are trying to get him to drop out of the race, Chuck Schumer and all of these other folks. And he's trying to save his presidency while Trump is traveling to Butler, right? And then Trump gets shot in the ear. And it's a really kind of cinematic thing because they go to a small hospital, right? I mean, there's no major hospital in Butler, Pennsylvania, but there's a local hospital there, and they're all back with Trump. And they sort of realize in the car that he's going to be okay because even though there's a lot of blood, like the Secret Service is able to tell his team, he's fine, right? He's acting fine. They put him in one car, his team's in another car trailing, so they go to the hospital. And, they're back and sort of getting treated, and Trump's commenting on XYZ, and all of these celebrities start calling him. Elon Musk calls him, Bezos calls him, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Sylvester Stallone. He's getting flooded with phone calls with all of these folks who are saying, we thought it was so courageous how you, raised your arm up in the air, and, we want to support you. And right after that, you saw Elon sort of give $275 million, plot his support going forward. And Trump, when I interviewed him a while ago, he said to me, he was like, do you think because of that, it helped me in the campaign? I think it probably helped some, right? What do you think? But you could tell in that moment, it sort of was for him, it was sort of a transformational moment in the race.
And just to add on, I think it's still impacting him to this day. I mean, the sort of effects of that incident, I think, are playing out.
Sure.
Trump doesn't really talk about it, but I think especially the assassination we saw this week, it's still having impacts on his psyche and the way that he behaves as president to this day.
This will be a movie at some point because it is cinematic, to use your phrase, Josh. The sort of imagery of Joe Biden in the winter of his political career, and Schumer goes out there to press him in person. He's doing these Zooms with House Democrats, and he gets into a shouting match with Jason Crow, who's a House Democrat from Colorado, who's a former Army Ranger, and Biden screaming about Bo's service versus Crow's service, and the call ends badly, and then Biden leaves his home in Rehoboth Beach to go to Saturday evening mass. And he walks out and it's raining. I mean, of course it's raining, right? It's just so cinematic. And the press pool that's always following the president around yells at Biden as he's going to mass. Do you have any response to President Trump being shot? Because he hadn't heard. Because he was on
just as he was coming out of mass.
Yeah, coming out of mass, right,
Yeah.
exactly. because he'd been a mask for the last hour.
Yeah.
It's an incredible day in the history of the
It
country.
was one other great moment in the ER that I still think about. They get done checking with Trump, and they're sort of, trying to plot out to leave, and Trump tells them that he wants a CAT scan, and the doctor's like, we don't think you need a CAT scan, sir. We're going to put in. He said, no. They'll say I didn't give a CAT scan, and then I'm not, with it anymore, so we got to do a CAT scan. So they take him back at his demands, not at the doctor's demands, and put him in the tunnel and do a CAT scan. And then he said, this team, he's like, I want the film. I want to be able to show the film, right? So they're doing this unnecessary CAT scan of President Trump back there. And then when they're flying back to Bedminster, he's supposed to go back to Bedminster that night. The Secret Service doesn't want to take him back there because there's still a lot of members there, the people playing golf there, the people having dinner there. It's a club. It's not a public club, but it's a private club where there are lots of people there. And so they have to clear the club and get everyone gone from the club, and get everyone moved to his reservations there, get them to pack their rooms up, get everyone there who's not necessary. So they have to hold, and they're sitting there waiting at the airport in one of those, the private airport lounges where you're sitting, waiting, eating pizza so they can take off and fly back to Bedminster to his private club.
They have to clear Trump's club of the paying customers, right,
so they can go back. Anyway.
It's fascinating. Speaking of July, Tyler, take us through July, because this is the pivotal month in which the pressure campaign on Biden to drop out takes off. But before you get into that, sort of talk about something else, which I think is sort of a book within a book, which is this incredible campaign by Biden's inner circle to keep bad news away from the rest of the White House staff and the campaign itself, much of which is sort of in the dark about Biden's political standing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. It truly is, and I think we will continue to learn more about the steps that they took. I mean, obviously Biden knew that things were not going well, but I don't think he was fully aware of the widespread panic and fear within the party. There's some great scenes where this unfolds. There's a meeting that, so Schumer is trying to get Democratic senators not to publicly call for Biden to step down or drop out of the race. And he negotiates and says, I'm going to hold them back, but you have to give us a meeting with the senior campaign leadership. Right. And so there's this meeting right outside Capitol Hill where all the Democratic senators come into a room like this, and sitting at the table are three of Biden's top aides, and they're giving a presentation that's like, we can still win, here's X, Y, and Z reason why. Totally unconvincing to the senators, and one by one, these senators stand up and basically say he has to drop out. Joe Manchin said, it's like your grandpa, you need to take the car keys away from him. I mean, it's just this evocative scene of senior members of the Democratic Party, Democratic senators, begging these aides to tell Biden to drop out. And the aides are just I can't shell-shocked by what they are hearing from esteemed members of the Democratic Party. So then they go back, and all they say is, please tell this to Joe Biden. Please tell him. And J-Mart brought up the Schumer meeting at Biden's house the day that Trump gets shot, and Schumer later said, I don't think Biden ever knew how bad it was. They said that if they took a poll of the they took a poll in the room, how many Democratic senators wanted Joe Biden to stay in the race, and 3 of them raised their hand. And so and Biden didn't know that. I mean, he knew it was bad, but not to the level that his former colleagues, the institution he prized above else, the Senate, where he served for decades, they all wanted him out.
But this is being kept from him, though.
Yeah, and then the other thing that is really remarkable is the polling. So I don't know if you guys remember from this time, he does this interview with George Stephanopoulos in Wisconsin, and George...
After the debate.
After the debate, and it's sort of, he's on this tour to prove that he can still do it.
Right.
And George is presenting him with polls and says, polling shows most Democrats don't want you to run, they want you to get out of the race, you can't win. And he goes, that's not what I'm seeing. And Biden's pollsters freak out. They're like, well, that's what our polls are showing, so what are you looking at? And they are really worried that their professional reputation is on the line, because other candidates will be like, they work for Biden, but they work for Democratic senators, et cetera. And all those senators saw the polling too, that he was losing. And he was just living in this bubble where he never met with the pollsters. So the entire campaign, he never sat down with his pollsters to get a presentation. And even after the debate, when the pollsters wanted to present to him, they only got to meet with Joe Biden's aides. And one of the great scenes in the book is the pollsters are giving a presentation to the campaign, and their conclusion is basically like, there's no path to victory. They're like, there are messages that work, but our problem is not the messages, it's the messenger. People don't believe he's up for the job. This is July after the debate. And 2 days after that call, Steve Ricchetti, one of Joe Biden's longtime aides, calls one of the pollsters and reams him out and says, your job is not to tell us we can't win. Your job is to tell us how we can win. He's like, I'm presenting the data. Like, you can't win. And the most remarkable thing about this whole episode is after the election, Kamala loses. To this day, Joe Biden and Mike Donlin and Steve Ricchetti still believe if Joe Biden had stayed in the race, he would have won.
Yeah, and to show how sort of big the bubble was, I mean, after the debate performance that he had, he couldn't raise money anymore. People were canceling fundraisers. They weren't answering. They weren't able to raise any amount of money. We heard that from lots of people. There were no volunteers who wanted to be out with the campaign anymore. It was all depressed, and the numbers were really bad. And one of the things that was happening was the campaign was not only losing in battleground states, but there were states that previously weren't competitive that were suddenly becoming competitive, right? It wasn't they were just trying to protect their sort of trailing a little bit. They were losing potentially in places like New Mexico and Minnesota and places that usually are not, Republican states. And his team who works on the campaign is super concerned about all of this and thinks if he doesn't get out of the race, the Democrats don't have a chance. And they try to get meetings with Biden to talk to him about all the problems. And his team, Ricchetti, Donlin, these guys won't let them come into the Oval Office and meet with Biden. So one of his aides, Adrienne Elrod, comes up with a solution, and she calls. Biden famously every morning watched Morning Joe in the White House. And so she called Joe and Mika and gave them the same briefing that they wanted to give the president, and they delivered it on air the next morning. And so that's how you got the message to Biden.
The power of TV. Our presidents had a lot in common. Biden and Trump watched more TV than they probably should have, and would call, both of them do this, would see allies on TV, and they would call them after their TV hit. Some Biden and Trump both do.
We have a scene in the book where AOC was on CNN, and Biden called her after CNN and said, you did a great job defending me, which is a very charming thing. I mean, the funny thing is, after Biden lost, he called Trump and invited him to come to the White House. And on the call, this is what we report in the book, Trump says, in another life, we would be friends and go golfing.
So, Tyler,
they haven't played golf yet.
What ultimately spurred Biden that Sunday in July 21st, to drop out of the race?
So there's a few things. I think to set the scene, you have to remember Biden also gets COVID during this timeline. So he's in trying to save his presidential campaign. He goes out to Las Vegas to meet with, I think the NAACP is having a conference. There's a few different things, and this is part of the I'm still in it. And then he gets COVID and is actually quite sick. I think people, they didn't fully, he's back in Rehoboth Beach, and he's sleeping for a large chunk of those days before he drops out because he's quite ill. So then that weekend comes around, and he invites Mike Donlin and Steve Ricchetti to his house in Rehoboth, and starts to sort of talk through the strategy for the campaign. And what the message was, he ultimately realized how bad it was, how many Democrats, if he had not gone out that weekend, the entire Democratic caucus would have called for him to step down. That day, more Democratic senators started to come out, but it would have just, the floodgates would have opened up. That next week, the Congress was coming back into session. It would have just been a bloodbath for him. And so he didn't want to run up against it. Hunter Biden, his son, who was also involved in these conversations, thinks that COVID was sort of part of it, that he finally had a moment of reflection in his sickness to be can I really do this? Is this possible? And so I think it was a confluence of factors. But at that point, like, the entire party was against him. He had very few allies. Chris Coons, the senator from Delaware, had called him the day before. Coons was in Colorado at the Aspen Forum and said to Biden, and Coons was like a very loyal Delaware guy, and said to him, like, I want to tell you this story about this guy in Delaware, a union guy from riding the train. He has no stake in the game, but just thinks that you should know. He thinks you should drop out.
Yeah.
And Biden asks Coons, are you one of them? Do you think I should drop out? And Coons says yes.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, at that point, it was just like, there was 4 people behind Joe Biden. His 2 aides, his wife, his son.
Yeah, it was critical mass, and
Yeah.
the dam was about to break. When the book came out earlier this year, one of the pieces that a lot of folks glommed onto when it was released, it got a lot of buzz, was your personal experience chasing Joe Biden. I said at the top of this conversation that this was the only book that President Trump cooperated for about the campaign last year, and you guys tried your damnedest to get Biden to cooperate too, and you went to extreme measures. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we set out to write the definitive story of the 2024 election, and as part of that, we wanted to interview everyone who played a key role, and we got almost everyone. Obviously, Josh went down to Mar-a-Lago 10 days before the inauguration, and the book opens with the scene of Mar-a-Lago that day, and it's just this amazing scene. If you're not, you should just read it for the first few pages of just what Mar-a-Lago's like at that moment.
A lot of gold.
A lot of gold. But I had covered Joe Biden for 5 years. I never had a sit-down interview with him. Joe Biden never did an interview with the New York Times, Washington Post, or Wall Street Journal for his entire presidency. He's the first one in decades. I forget which, you might remember which president was the last one not to give an interview to one of those papers, and it's a long time ago.
Rutherford B. Hayes. I'm kidding.
No, but
He has no idea. He's making that up.
It goes back a while.
It's like a shocking statistic that every president has sat down for an interview. So I never interviewed him. I wrote a 4-part series about his presidency. Like, I really pulled out all the stops to try to get him. And eventually, I made multiple requests to interview him for the book. Trump was participating. And they said he could not. It would conflict with his memoir that he's writing. I think our project and the memoir are very different. But alas, I didn't really take that as a satisfactory answer. So after he left office, someone gave me his cell phone number. And so I called him. And similar to Trump, right? Like, Trump is now like anyone, we all have his number. Josh has spoken to him on the phone. Like, he'll answer any call that he gets. Biden, similarly, very few people had Joe Biden's cell phone number. And so what aides told me is that it was just aides that called him and telemarketers. So he answered the phone because so few people actually called him. I called him, he didn't pick up. I didn't leave a message. I thought I'd try again. The next day, I'm making dinner at home, and my phone is connected to Bluetooth, and the song interrupts, and it says, "Call from Joe Biden." So I pick up, and Biden had just called me back, but he didn't know who it was because I didn't leave a message, and he didn't have my number. So I told him, it was about 7 p.m., I said, look, I think he ostensibly knows who I am because I followed him around the country and the world for 5 years. But I said, I'm working on this book. I think it's really important to get your perspective. I'd really love to find time. And he said, I'm about to have dinner. Give me a call tomorrow. Immediately, I'm getting blown up by his aides, calling me, texting me, can you give me a call? Can you give me a call? And I just ignore them because they had already made their position clear. Joe Biden didn't want to speak for the book, but Joe Biden told me he wanted to speak for the book. So the next morning, I call him back, and it's a very classic Joe Biden moment. He's waiting in the Amtrak station to get on the train to go to D.C., but he picks up again, and I ask him 2 very brief questions, just sort of trying to get the conversation started, and then he's like, I'm getting on the train, I have to go. But he never said, like, you should not call me, this is totally unacceptable. He answered my questions, which was, do you have any regrets about how this all unfolded, your decision to run or drop out? He said no. I asked him about Trump very briefly, and had a laundry list of questions that unfortunately did not get to. But then his aides again started like jamming my phone, furious that I had called him back, without even, acknowledging the fact that Joe Biden told me to call him and didn't tell me to stop calling. So what I did was continue to try to call him. I called later that day, went straight to voicemail. The next day I called, and instead of going to voicemail, it was replaced by a Verizon wireless message that the number had been changed. So my project in getting Joe Biden to speak was very limited, but I think it's a really good window into how they managed around him. Never once did he ever say to me, stop calling me, do not do this, which I get all the time. People do not like when I call. Joe Biden was happy to talk, but his aides made it impossible.
The effort to protect Biden from himself is an incredible story. Let's
It also is remarkable to me, just as someone who's covered this for a long time. I can't imagine any aide, whatever you think of Donald Trump, being able to take Trump's cell phone number from him. They wouldn't even try. Like, maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. But no one would ever go into the office and be like, sir, you have to give me the phone. We're changing your number because the New York Times is calling. He would laugh him out of the room. I mean, it wouldn't even work. I caught him the other day, like Trump, and he answers, he goes, hello, right? I mean, he's like, you're not gonna take his selfie. You're not gonna take his cell phone from him.
Josh,
Like,
you've
it's
been
just not
very
gonna
nasty.
happen. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to imagine Trump's 23-year-old staffers telling Sly Stallone, Mr. Stallone, could you please call the press office instead and not call Mr. Trump directly? I don't think you're going to tell Rambo to go through the staff anytime soon. All right, let's take some questions here about the book. Yes, sir.
Yeah, first question, do you think Joe Biden would have had a chance to run? I think I've done that question. If not, would it be a statement rate? Would it have been closer to Kamala Harris' outcome?
Sorry, what was the first one?
Do you think he would have had a chance to win if he stayed in the race?
I mean, no. I think he had lost huge chunks of the Democratic base. I think many of them would have ended up voting for him, but the way that the country moved, if we look at the results now, I don't think it would have been closer. I think he would have lost, and it would not have been closer.
Who else? Yes, sir.
So that's what Barack Obama wanted, and that's what Nancy Pelosi wanted. I mean, one of my favorite scenes in the book is the day that Joe Biden calls Kamala to drop out, and then she launches her campaign and just starts calling all these Democrats, all the governors, senators, party leaders, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, basically asking for their support. Kamala and her team obviously thought it was ludicrous for there to be a primary. I think there just wasn't the infrastructure in place to set that up. Like, think about how contested it is right now, which state gets to go first. Iowa, New Hampshire, they're going to spend 2 years figuring that out. Yeah. There's just no infrastructure. The DNC, I think one of the interesting stories just about politics generally is the diminishing power of party committees. Like, Joe Biden's people, not him really, controlled that DNC with an iron fist. They did what he wanted, and we're seeing Trump now with the RNC. Like, there was no infrastructure in place to set that up. Like, what would that process look like? They would have had a conference, and the DNC, not a democracy that doesn't often, takes their time to come to decisions. You just could imagine how would you, unless someone like Obama was like, I'm going to decide the rules and we're just going to go with it. It's just so complicated to do that. And I also think that, Harris made a very aggressive case. There's funny moments there where she's calling, she calls Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, and says, like, I'm running, I'd like your support. And he's like, what's the process for running? And she's like, this is it. I'm calling you, I'm asking for your support. J.B. Pritzker, who wanted to run and was annoyed about the whole thing, told her that he couldn't endorse her immediately because he thought it was a conflict of interest because his state was hosting the convention. Total ludicrous BS thing, but he was trying to buy time to figure out if he could, plot his own run. But I think that this energy, the relief that so many Democrats felt from Biden dropping out just sort of rushed into Kamala's benefit.
Democrats had almost a month of chaos, and were so hungry for certainty and clarity, and desperate to beat Trump, and they just figured that let's put the drama behind us and settle behind Kamala. And I think in hindsight, maybe if they had 10 more days of drama to get a nominee, it would have been maybe more helpful. Although I probably still think she comes away with the nomination, even in that scenario. Yes, sir.
Based on what you know about Van, is this just the icing on the cake? Is it going to get a lot worse?
You on that one? No. He said, based on, you want to speak up?
Based on what they know about Trump, is this just the icing on the cake? Is it going to get worse?
And by worse, I'm going to let you define that.
You watch the news, you tell me.
He writes the news, man.
I think he will keep testing as far as he can go, right? Yeah, I think on all fronts to make the government the way he wants. I mean, I will say, though, to this point so far, folks who are like, oh, he's an autocrat, he's a dictator, you hear folks on the left say that. I mean, he's respected court orders, right? So far, Lisa Cook for Federal Reserve woman, he tried to take out the board member. He tried to fire her. The court said she's staying in, right? I mean, on a lot of the rulings, they've waited to get to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's been very positive for the Trump administration, right, and given them a lot of what they wanted. But they've had some injunctions where they've lost a lot of cases along the way and lost some of the Supreme Court, and they've had to follow those. I mean, I certainly think he. I'm not going to say worse because I think there are probably people here who like what he's doing, so I'm going to stay neutral on that. But I think you will see more and more of what you are seeing now. Yes. Does that answer your question?
And I think just to add on quickly, part of that is he's faced little opposition. Really the only opposition he's faced is the courts, right? Congress isn't doing anything.
So.
Yeah.
But the unspoken red line in Washington, though, is Trump is still abiding by the federal courts. And the moment he doesn't abide by a federal court decision, I think we're in a different place. Yes, ma'am.
So I don't know if you've read the book, Outclassed, Jonesy Williams. The gist of it is the Democratic Party lost the election in large part because they weren't paying attention to the economic needs of the middle 50% of the population. Joe Biden presents himself as the working man, right? Joe from, Scranton. He seems to have lost control of the agenda before he ever started. At what point did he lose control, being protected by his people, right? The appearance is that he was not playing from the very outset.
I mean, I think the economy story is really interesting, and you're right. That was sort of middle-class Joe, Scranton Joe, lunch pail guy, like union guy. I think one of the things that's really interesting is they felt that they had done, they being the Biden White House and his senior team, that they inherited this, ravaged economy from COVID, and they had saved it, and they had this economic agenda that was working. And they were very fearful of acknowledging any economic pain. They felt that if they did not brag about the economy, they appropriated the Bidenomics thing, trying to make what was started as a derisive term from the Wall Street Journal editorial board to own it as saying we have a good story to tell about the economy. They felt if they didn't do that, no one would, because there was so much criticism of the economy. And pollsters time and time again said you need to acknowledge that people are feeling economic pain, and they just really wouldn't until it was much too late. I mean, I think it's a story about like politics and power, right? When you're in power, and your prism is, I'm doing all this stuff, I'm passing all this legislation, look at all this investment, you get disconnected. And I think that was another thing about Biden. He used to, go to Delaware every night. He never lived in Washington. He had a feel for the people, and I think any president, their circle shrinks tremendously because of the way that the Secret Service and other things work. And I think there was a gap there that, put some distance between him and those experiences of Americans.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, I actually have a question for each of you. For Mr. Dawsey, you spoke earlier today about President Trump coming in, having a whole new team, no idea how it was going to work, and I've noticed that he has essentially none of his original lineup as it were.
That's right.
The question is, do you think that he just has a mindset of these people are tainted, I don't want to deal with them, or is he regretting maybe some of his choices and he wishes maybe trust him a little line on him? For Mr. Pager, my question is, if this were a different world and that statute was taken out from, do you think that that would have affected Joe Biden's decision to drop out, and why do you think that would be?
I'll take yours first. I think Trump is much happier with his team this time around than his first time. I think his first team, you had folks like John Kelly, former General Mattis for the Department of Defense, Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, Gary Cohn, who was his top economic advisor, who viewed their world and their job, and they would said this since a lot of them have, as curbing a lot of his impulses, taking tariffs off his desk, stopping him from pulling troops out of a country, moving things so he would forget about them, like trying to basically protect what they viewed as some of his worst impulses, like protect him from, for example, his first counsel, Don McGahn, who was his lawyer in the first term, stopped him on many occasions from talking to Department of Justice officials because he said, that's an independent agency or semi-independent agency. We don't do that. None of that's happening this time, right? So I think for better or worse, the way Trump looks at it, you said you're asking me his perspective. I think he's much happier this time. He also has a chief of staff this time, Susie Wiles, who's one of the main characters in our book, who's known him for a long time. He probably has the closest relationship he's ever had with a staffer, I would say, with her, with maybe the exception of Dan Scavino, a social media and guy, but probably the closest relationship with Susie. And Susie doesn't try to manage him. I mean, we were talking for the book at one point, and she said to me, he won the presidency twice, and he made billions of dollars. This is her talking. Is it really my job to chase him around all day and tell him not to do stuff, right? So from her perspective, it's a different world. So if you're asking for his lens, I think his second term, he's much happier with the people around him.
Very quickly, what's interesting in the book is that we report Biden's aides saw the assassination as a potential way to reset the race in his benefit. They thought that he could bring the country together. He ran his first campaign about, or not first, his 2020 race was about rebuilding the backbone of the nation, sort of bringing people together, uniting the country, and they thought he could sort of speak to those loftier values. Everyone else thought it was game over, Trump was going to win. It's impossible to know what counterfactuals are, but I could see that. I think the poll, he still would have been pushed out because the polling wouldn't have changed dramatically. But they thought that opportunity for Biden to sort of bring the country together and try to tamp down the political rhetoric and violence could have been an opportunity for him. He just never really succeeded.
You got time for two more tight questions. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
What do you mean? He was still very involved in the campaign. He ran the debate prep, so he was at Camp David for all of those days prepping him. He was talking to Biden in the last days. He stepped back from being chief of staff, but he was very still a close advisor to the president.
Yes, sir, Brad.
I have not noticed significant changes over the past decade. I think if you look at some of the way he talks, there's been analysis done of it. I haven't done any of it, and I would say, frankly, it's sort of above my pay grade to look at that in a way. He, in his conversations with me, has basically behaved the same way for the past decade. I have not noticed much difference, I must say.
Yes, sir, we'll do it one more, yeah. There's a real element of that idea. I can't speak to his cognitive state. I think the issue of president's health is a really good question and a really hard reporting target. But in terms of your question just about the Democratic Party, there's a saying like Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. And it's true. I think Republicans have basically ceded all power to Trump in Congress, in state legislatures. I mean, we're seeing now Trump is basically bullying state legislators to redraw their maps because it benefits him. And so Democrats are just not the same. I mean, Biden had real challenges. They had control of the Senate with slim margins, but Biden was unable to get everyone in line as easily as Trump is. They have always fallen in line behind him, and I think Democrats lament that, but it's just the truth. We got to wrap there. Can I just say one last thing? If you want to grab these guys for a bit, they'll be here for a second afterwards. More importantly, they got a bunch of books down under the tent. They're going to sign those books. Please buy one and get these guys to sign it, and give them a round of applause. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.